Berlin, April 30th, 1945. A city burning from the inside out. The sky above is choking with smoke. The streets below are crumbling in silence. But deep underground, behind a steel-reinforced door, history is about to collapse. A single shot cracks through the concrete. Adolf Hitler is dead. Just outside the room, Rochus Misch freezes. He's not just a soldier, he's Hitler's bodyguard, his telephonist, his shadow, and he hears everything. But here's the twist. When people searched for Hitler's body, it was nowhere to be found. Rumors exploded, doubts grew, and all eyes turned to Rochus Misch. He denied everything. For decades he denied, until the final chapter of his life, when he revealed a secret he had kept since that day in the bunker. What did he see? This is his story. And the mystery begins now. Let's find out with Mind Gap. Imagine a boy born into a world already broken. Rochus Misch came into life on July 29, 1917, in Oppeln, a small town now part of Poland, and his story started with loss. His father fell in World War I before Rochus could know him, and his mother slipped away when he was still a toddler. Raised by his grandparents in a home with little money, he grew up fast in a Germany scarred by defeat. The streets were quiet but heavy with despair, and for a child with no parents, hope felt far away. Yet, in this shattered place, something was stirring, a path that would pull him into history's darkest corners. What could a boy like Rochus do in a country with no future? Germany after the war was a mess, its people hungry and its pride crushed. Jobs were rare, and young men like him had to find a way to survive. The 1920s dragged on with empty promises, and by the 1930s, chaos ruled. Political fights filled the air, and the economy offered no mercy. For Rochus, the answer came in 1937 when he was 20 years old. He joined the SS, a group tied to Adolf Hitler's Nazi party, but he didn't sign up for grand ideas. "I needed a job," he said years later, his voice plain and honest. Survival, not politics, drove him, and that choice set him on a road he couldn't turn back from. The SS wasn't just any group, it was special, rugged, and built on loyalty. Rochus started in the Verfügungstruppe, a unit that would later become the Waffen-SS, the fighting branch of the SS. They trained him hard, teaching him to march, shoot, and follow orders without blinking. Discipline became his life, and obedience was the rule he lived by. This wasn't about believing in big speeches or hating anyone. It was about becoming a soldier who didn't ask why. The SS wanted men who would stand by Hitler no matter what, and Rochus, quiet and steady, fit right in. He wasn't loud or full of fire, but ready to do what he was told. Then came 1939, and the world shifted under his feet. Germany stormed into Poland, and Rochus was there, boots on the ground in a war that moved fast and hit hard. The invasion crushed towns and lives in weeks, but it wasn't all glory for him. A bullet found his lung during the fight, and the pain nearly ended his life. He pulled through, and for his courage, they gave him the Iron Cross, a medal that marked him as brave. That wound changed everything. It took him off the front lines and put him on a new path. Back home to heal, he caught the eye of men who noticed his grit, and in 1940 they picked him for something bigger. The boy from Oppeln was about to step closer to power than he ever dreamed. That new role was with the Führerbegleitkommando, Hitler's Guard. Only a few got chosen, and they had to be loyal, silent, and strong. Rochus fit the mold perfectly. He wasn't chasing fame or pushing ideas, just following the orders that came his way. This job wasn't about battlefields anymore. It was about standing by one man, the most powerful in Germany. He'd be near Hitler, close enough to hear his voice and see his moves. This was a strange twist for a 23-year-old with no family and a simple life, but Rochus didn't question it. He stepped into the shadows of power, and the world around him burned. What did it feel like to be so close to the top? The Nazi machine was growing, tightening its hold on everything, and terrible things were starting to happen. The Holocaust was taking shape, lives disappearing in numbers too big to grasp. Rochus stood just outside the rooms where plans were made and always said he didn't know. He didn't see the camps, didn't hear the screams, or understand the scale of it all. Was he in the dark or too good at keeping quiet? That question hangs over his story, pulling us in deeper. A poor kid who wanted a job had landed in the heart of something monstrous, and he claimed it all passed him by. His life had been a climb from nothing. Born in 1917 with no parents, raised in struggle, he joined the SS in 1937 for a paycheck, trained in 1938 to obey, fought in 1939 with blood on his hands, and by 1940, he was guarding the man who ruled it all. Each step made sense to him then, a way to eat and live. But those steps tied him to a name that would echo with shame. Could he have known where it was leading? Maybe not at first, but the truth got harder to miss as the years ticked by. Still, Rochus held his line. He was just a soldier, not a thinker, not a monster. Picture him there, young and severe, standing watch while the world fell apart. The boy who'd lost everything found a place in the SS, giving him a purpose. He fought, he bled, he earned his medal, and then he stepped into Hitler's circle. It's a story that starts small and quiet but builds into something heavy, something you can't look away from. How did he end up here? What did he see, or choose not to see? The answers aren't clear yet, which keeps us turning the page. This is just the beginning, a glimpse of a man caught in a storm he didn't start. From Opeln's dusty streets to the edge of Hitler's shadow, Rochus Misch's journey was only getting started. Next, we'll step inside that inner circle, where the walls whispered secrets and the air grew thick with dread. Rochus Misch stood just outside the heavy doors, his back straight, eyes always watching. Inside, Adolf Hitler's voice came and went, sometimes calm, sometimes burning with anger. Misch wasn't a part of those meetings, but he was always nearby. His job wasn't to lead or question. He was there to protect, make phone calls, and carry messages. That was all. Or at least, that's what he said. Every day, he wore the same uniform, polished his boots, and stood silently in the middle of history. He handled the phones for Hitler, passed sealed messages between top Nazi officials, and waited outside rooms where decisions were made. Some days, he heard laughter. Other times, he heard yelling and slamming fists. He remembered seeing Hitler smile at Eva Braun in the hallway, then rage in front of his generals just hours later. Misch insisted that no one ever spoke of death camps around him. He said he never heard about gas chambers, never knew about the Holocaust. Could someone that close honestly know nothing? Or was it easier to pretend? The Reich Chancellery in Berlin was the center of it all. Power lived in that building. Misch moved through its vast halls where footsteps echoed and marble floors gleamed. The most powerful men of the Third Reich passed him every day. Himmler, Goebbels, Göring. Their faces were tight with pressure. Behind the doors, Hitler studied maps and gave orders with sharp words. Misch stayed close, guarding the room or answering the phones, never stepping in but always hearing enough. He claimed he never fully understood what was happening. Yet the weight of those walls, the silence between words, said more than enough. Everything changed at the Berghof, Hitler's home in the Bavarian Alps. The mood was softer. The views stretched across snow-covered mountains. Hitler strolled in the garden with Eva Braun, fed his dog Blondie, and drank tea while reading newspapers. Misch watched the peaceful scenes. But even there, planes flew overhead and updates from the war still came in. The calm was thin, like a glass ready to shatter. Misch felt that tension, though he never said much about it. The contrast between the mountain silence and the cities burning below was hard to ignore. But the darkest shadow hung over the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. It was a military base buried in the forest, built like a maze with bunkers, traps, and guards at every turn. Hitler stayed there often, working through maps and battles with his generals. The mood inside was cold and nervous. Trust was rare, and eyes moved quickly. Misch sensed something was wrong. He didn't know what it was, but whispers floated through the halls. People were afraid. That fear would soon prove real. On July 20th, 1944, everything exploded. A bomb placed by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg went off during a meeting. The goal was to kill Hitler and end the war. Misch was nearby when the floor shook and smoke rushed out of the doorway. The noise was deafening. People screamed. Bodies were thrown across the room, but somehow Hitler survived. His uniform was torn, his face bruised, but he stood. Misch ran to help. He moved rubble, connected emergency calls, and stayed with Hitler as the compound shook with panic. The plan had failed, and the price would be deadly. Hitler ordered mass arrests. Executions followed. Misch watched the walls close in. After the bombing, everything changed. Hitler's trust in others was gone. Suspicion replaced routine. Even longtime allies became targets. Misch said little and kept working, doing his job like always. But the fear grew thicker. The bunker halls echoed with silence instead of confidence. People disappeared overnight. Misch watched it all, a quiet figure in the middle of a storm. He said he didn't know the whole truth. He repeated that again and again. "I was just a telephonist," he would later say. But his job placed him near the center of power. He stood outside the rooms where decisions were made. He handled calls from camps, battlefields, and people carrying out orders. Was it possible that none of that reached him? Rochus Misch stayed at his post. He stood in the shadows through Berlin, the Berghof, and the Wolf's Lair, keeping the system moving. He claimed he never looked beyond his duty. But history looks harder. His silence became its mystery. Soon, that silence would be tested. The war was closing in. The world outside was changing, and Misch would follow Hitler into the final chapter, deep beneath a broken city, where the Third Reich would finally fall. Next, we enter the bunker in Berlin, where chaos turns into collapse, and Misch becomes the last man standing at the end of Hitler's world. Captured by the Soviets in the final hours of the war, Rochus Misch was dragged from Berlin's ruins into something even colder. No longer a bodyguard, he was now a prisoner, stripped of his uniform and placed inside Stalin's vast prison system. The Red Army saw him not just as a soldier, but as a key witness, someone who had been closer to Adolf Hitler than almost anyone else in those final chaotic days. The Soviets wanted answers, details, even secrets. But Misch gave them silence. He was sent east. His journey passed through destroyed cities and frozen railways until he reached the labor camps of Kazakhstan and Siberia. Temperatures there could drop below -30 degrees. The food was a little more than thin soup and dry bread. Misch shoveled frozen dirt, slept on wooden boards, and watched other prisoners waste away. His cellmates came and went, some dragged out and were never seen again. Interrogations were common. Soviet officers pressed him with questions about Hitler, about the bunker, about the regime's final days. But Misch rarely gave them more than short answers. He repeated the same line, "I was just a telephonist." 9 years passed this way. 9 winters. 9 summers. 9 years of cold, hunger, and silence. Misch never changed his story. He never claimed to know more than what he had seen and heard from his post. He did not confess to secrets. He did not express guilt. The Soviets eventually gave up. In 1954, they let him go. Misch returned to a different Berlin. The war had split the city in half. New walls were going up. New enemies had appeared. But Misch didn't talk about the Cold War. He didn't join any political groups. He opened a paint store in a working-class neighborhood and married Gerda, the woman he had written to during the war. Together, they raised a daughter named Brigitte. He avoided the spotlight. For decades, few people knew who he was. Then, in the 2000s, everything changed. Misch, now an older man, decided to speak. In 2008, he released a memoir called The Last Witness. The title was powerful. Misch had been there. He had seen Hitler alive in the final hours and dead the next day. The world wanted details. But what they got was something different. Instead of expressing guilt or regret, Misch spoke kindly about Hitler. He called him a good boss. He said Hitler was polite, thoughtful, even generous. Misch remembered wedding gifts and friendly talks. He said Hitler never shouted at staff. The book made headlines, not because of what Misch revealed, but because of what he left out. Misch denied any knowledge of the Holocaust. In interviews, he said the word Auschwitz was never mentioned in the bunker. He admitted to hearing of Dachau, but thought it was just another prison. He claimed that no one around him spoke about the death camps. He described his job as technical, not political. He said he answered phones and connected calls, nothing more. Many people were angry. Holocaust survivors and historians accused him of lying, or at least of pretending not to know. They pointed out that he worked near men like Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann, and that the bunker was not separate from the rest of the Nazi world. They said Misch couldn't have been that close and still be that blind. His daughter, Brigitte, refused to support his story. She later worked with Jewish groups and spoke openly about her discomfort with her father's views. Her mother had Jewish ancestry, and Brigitte said she could not accept how her father remained loyal to Hitler even decades later. Still, Misch kept speaking. He gave interviews to international journalists. He appeared in documentaries, constantly repeating the same message. He said he was only a witness. He said he never tried to change the story, only to share what he experienced. But many believed that silence itself was a form of guilt. He was photographed beside his SS uniform, standing tall but calm. He didn't smile, but he didn't look ashamed. His voice contained no fear, no sadness, only the same steady story. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't say sorry. As time passed, his words continued to spark debate. Some viewed him as an older man lost in the past. Others saw him as a symbol of something darker, the quiet loyalty that helps evil grow. They questioned what it means to serve without asking why. Misch died in 2013 at the age of 96. His funeral was quiet. No Nazi symbols were allowed. He left a book, some interviews, and a storm of questions behind him. His defenders said he was just a small part of a vast machine. His critics said even small parts can harm. The mystery remains. Did Misch honestly not know about the genocide happening around him? Or did he choose to stay silent? And if a man so close to power said nothing, how many others did the same? In the next and final chapter, we will explore what Misch's silence means. Not just for him, but for all of us. Because history is not only made by those who act, but also by those who look away. Rochus Misch died in 2013, and with him the last living connection to Adolf Hitler's final hours vanished. He was the final voice, the last pair of eyes inside the bunker where the Third Reich collapsed. But instead of closure, his story left behind a fog of controversy. Misch was not a man easily labeled. He was not a general, not a politician, not a decision-maker. He was a bodyguard, a telephonist, a man who stood in the background. And yet his nearness to power makes his silence louder. He watched history unfold from just a few feet away. He saw Hitler marry Eva Braun. He heard the final gunshot that ended the dictator's life. He saw the bodies burned outside the bunker. But for all that, Misch maintained one thing until the end. He knew nothing of the crimes committed by the regime he served. He claimed he had never heard of the Holocaust. He said the word Auschwitz was never spoken in the bunker. To many, that seems impossible. Historians find his account deeply troubling. How could a man working daily inside Hitler's circle, who answered phones for Goebbels and passed messages to Bormann, honestly know nothing? The Nazi regime was built on secrecy, but it was also built on participation. Misch's refusal to acknowledge what was happening beyond the walls of the Führer bunker has raised more questions than it answered. His memoir, The Last Witness, presented a version of events that felt incomplete. He described Hitler as kind, polite, even generous. He remembered wedding gifts, calm conversations, and small moments that made Hitler seem almost human. But he offered no insight into the decisions that defined the regime's evil. He avoided the camps, the trains, the gas chambers. His memories stopped at the edge of genocide, as if those parts of history didn't exist for him. To some, Misch was simply a product of his time. He was a young man raised in a twisted ideology, trained to obey and not question. Perhaps he truly believed that loyalty meant silence. Possibly, after the war, survival meant forgetting. But to others, this is not enough. They see his silence as denial, a dangerous refusal to face the past. Misch's story is a warning in a world desperate to understand how evil grows. Even his daughter, Brigitte, rejected his view of the past. Her mother was part Jewish, and she chose to work with Jewish organizations. She distanced herself from her father's words, saying, "My father was loyal to Hitler to the very end, but I chose not to be." Her decision shows the split between generations, between memory and responsibility. While Misch clung to his version of events, others tried to rebuild the truth from the ruins. The world reacted sharply to Misch's public statements. Survivors of the Holocaust, historians, and journalists criticized him for avoiding moral responsibility. He wasn't on trial. No court charged him. But in the court of public opinion, his silence felt like betrayal. When asked directly, Misch never apologized. He never admitted regret. He insisted he was just a soldier, just a telephonist. But history is not kind to those who claim innocence from inside the storm. His legacy is not one of guilt or innocence. It is one of silence. A silence that echoes through time. Misch forced us to ask uncomfortable questions. How close can someone stand to evil and claim not to see it? Was he blind, or did he choose not to look? And if Misch stayed quiet, how many others did the same? His story reminds us that history is not only shaped by those who act, but also by those who stand by. Misch didn't give orders. He didn't run camps. But he was there. He connected calls. He opened doors. He stood watch. And sometimes, being present is enough to be part of the story. Ultimately, Rochus Misch died with many secrets still locked behind his calm voice. Maybe he honestly didn't know. Perhaps he didn't want to. But either way, his life offers a final lesson. Silence is never neutral. In moments of darkness, choosing not to speak is a decision with consequences. The bunker may have collapsed, the war may have ended, but the questions remain. And so, as we close the chapter on the man who witnessed the fall of the Third Reich, one chilling thought lingers. How many others, like Misch, stood beside history's horrors and said nothing?